Welcome to the Basic Shapes video in Pixlr. First thing you want to do is open the worksheet. You should have downloaded the worksheet from the classroom page. Once you have that downloaded, and we're going to do that now, we're going to go into the classroom page. And then you're going to find the assignment with the basic shapes attached. I'm going to computer art, go to classwork, and then go down to the bottom and find the basic shapes worksheet in the digital painting unit. Once you find that, you're going to download the picture. Again, sometimes it doesn't come in as a download, so you just have to hit those three dots, open it in a new window, and then download it. So once you have that downloaded, then you're going to open it in Pixlr. What does this image look like? It's basically a bunch of shapes with a value scale. The other thing that you might want to download right at the same time is this color mixing worksheet as well, because you're going to be doing that in the next video. Okay, go ahead and download both of these from the class website. But we're just going to stay with the basic shapes. Once you have them downloaded, then open the Basic Shapes worksheet inside of Pixlr by finding it on your desktop. If you're in a Chromebook, this should be in your Downloads folder. Okay, go ahead and open the original and then hit Apply. Then it's going to pop in and it's going to be on its own background. So what we want to do is we want to start practicing making what we call temporary layers, like Matt Core does. So what you'll see is that the background is locked. You can also have a couple of, this little 3-dot window is some of the preferences. I would leave that locked. To make a new layer, hit the plus, make an empty layer, and then you'll notice that layer 2 is now appeared on top of the background layer. What we want to do is we want to have that on top, so that we're not working on the original background layer. That way we're not going to be erasing or drawing on top of that original worksheet. Zoom it in so that it is kind of filling your screen with one of the shapes, and then you're going to need the paintbrush. And I would change the paintbrush size up to something relatively big. Now this is going to be something that you're going to be doing quite a bit. So you could use the keyboard shortcut, which is the less than or greater than symbol. And then to pick a color, remember that if you hold the control key inside of Pixlr, you'll get this little menu and you can pick a color. So what am I going to do? I'm going to start with the cast shadow, which is basically on every single one of these shapes. They're already drawn on for you, so all you have to do is color that in the blackest black. So as we go here, we're going to be using that value scale down below to do a bit of shading. And this is going to take us a little bit of time to shade some of these in. So I might speed this up as we go along here. I also like to label my layers, and I like to keep the shadow on its own layer because it just makes things a little easier. So I'm labeling this layer cast shadow, and I'm probably going to lock it after I get done doing the rest of the cast shadows. Now, some of the tips that we've seen so far, like click shift, will fill in some of these items a little bit faster. So I'm going to start over with this. So I'm going to go click, shift click, and then I'll shift click back, and then I'll shift click, and then I'll fill this in with my darkest dark. And that's what the cast shadow is. We discussed it in the demo, or excuse me, the lecture before. So what I usually do is I do all the cast shadows first. Why? They're just a lot easier because it's the same color. It's just the blackest black. This one, again, I'm going to use the click, shift, click, and then I'm just going to color this in. Now, if I was wanting to do this a little faster, I might make my brush a little bit bigger, but that's not a huge deal at this point. I'm just going to fill it in. You could paint bucket in something like this too. That would be a little bit more helpful if you didn't want to use your mouse. I kind of like using that as a practice for painting though, because you need to get used to using your mouse with your painting tools on your computer. Okay, so here is all of the cast shadows. So now what we're going to do is I'm only going to do one of these items on here in Pixlr. The rest are actually in Photoshop, and you can kind of follow along inside there when I talk a little bit about how you should shade some of these shapes. So when we do things, we like to save often. And one of the things that Pixlr does not do well is that it doesn't save items in separate layers. So one of the things that you kind of want to do is you wish you could save just in case this kind of crashes, but at the same time you don't really want to save prematurely because then it will flatten your layers and you won't be able to have them separate. So I probably wouldn't flatten unless you're totally done with what you want today and you like it. Okay. So now I've made a new layer because the next layer I'm going to do is I'm going to start some of this blending. Now the blending I usually do on all one layer because it's a lot easier. And I'm actually going to start with the next darkest color. So whenever I shade value in, I start with my darkest dark and I move to the white. Why? It's easier to lay down darker colors and then put light over the top. So now I'm just kind of coming in here and I'm going to be shading kind of in the direction of the shape. So on a sphere, I actually shade in the direction of the shape. So it almost is like a half moon shape. If I was doing a different object, I might be doing a different set of shapes. And those are in the other videos. Now I'm coming back with the second or the next lightest color on top of this because I can start to build up a base color. So right now this is looking pretty banded. You don't want bands, you want it to look more smooth and together. So there's some things that we can do with that. So now I'm coming in and I'm gonna put the next lightest color in. And once I have this next lightest color in, then I'm going to start to kind of do a little bit of blending. Now, one of the things that Pixlr does not have, which Photoshop has, is something called the mixer brush. That is helpful for mixing things together, okay? So one of the things that you can use is you can use, a blur, the smudge tool. You can start smudging things together. That's fine too. Or sometimes I just use the transparency tool inside of the brush palette to just sort of back off on some of those colors because really truly if you were doing this as an actual painting you would just add less paint or have more washy paint that goes over the top of this that sort of either darkens it or lightens it. And so you notice here I have this sort of blending mode turned on of my my water droplet. It's the smudge tool. I can take and I can smudge this and then I can come back and I can put something over the top of it that will give it that same kind of mixed look. So I start kind of layering different transparencies over the top. Again, there's a luxury inside of Photoshop where there is a color mixing tool, and that color mixing tool is really a helpful tool for just sort of blending colors together. This is the alternative for that. So when we get to the painting, if you're inside of Pixlr, you're going to get used to using the smudge and the blur tool a lot. So in the effort to save a little bit of time, I'm going to speed this up a little bit. So I'm now taking the light and I'm putting the light on. So that's the very last thing that you want to put on. Notice that I pulled down my opacity to like 35%. Sometimes it's just a better way to do it. And again, you can kind of blend this in with either transparency or with the smudge tool. Either way will work. And then sometimes you just have to layer over the top of it until it gets the way that you want it. So now we have it just about, very close to the way that we want it. If you want it a little bit, you want to check it, you can actually zoom out and look at it from a distance. This is okay. It's not the greatest, but I haven't spent a ton of time on it. So some of these may take a bit of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that my cast shadow is locked, because now I want to make sure that I go in here and I start to erase some of the extra things that I have over the top of my cast shadow and things like that. So some of these other things inside of this window are important, and it's merging things down. So if you really like something, you can merge things down, or you can kind of keep them separate. The one problem inside Pixlr is that once you merge it down, it's done, and therefore you can't really do any edits to it. So now what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and go with a hard round eraser, or excuse me, hard flat eraser. And I'm just going to kind of affect the side, or I'm going to try and erase out what I did outside of the lines. And in order to do that, I turned the opacity down a little bit so I could see what was behind it, so I knew what to erase. One of the things about painting in Photoshop or Illustrator, or excuse me, Photoshop or Pixlr, is that you have to get used to kind of erasing with an eraser when you're outside the lines. It's also one of the greatest things that you can do, because on regular paper you would have to actually erase this or paint over it. So once I'm done erasing, I'm probably going to turn my transparency back up so that I can see what it actually looks like. And then I'll zoom out just to see it from a distance, because sometimes it just looks better, and it can kind of give you an indication whether or not that's working. And then I think I'm going to move on to my next shape. I might spend a little bit more time on this. We've got some bands on this, but it's looking pretty good. So I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to hit the plus, and this time I'm going to call it blending the cone. So that last layer, I just renamed it blending the sphere. This will be the cone. And then I'll start working on this cone shape. And for this, you can kind of look at the other Photoshop demo videos. It's going to be light in the center, dark at the edges.